Tall Tales. The Nymph Symphony.
Chapters.
Chapter 31. Refuge. "Is that you, Kaya?" asked a sweet but confused young voice from beside the dim corner fireplace, calling out softly and quietly from the other end of the bulky long wooden center table. Anera's unmistakable voice once again calling me over from some gloomy unseen darkness just outside the blur of natural eyesight. Her voice resonating from inside the dark enclosed bunker rather than up above in the moonlight where I assumed she was supposed to still be up within. Anera approached from around the long table to come and greet me and confirm my suspicions. Her reaction was most happy and welcoming, if not a little weird, considering the whole staggered amnesia and confusion she had surrounding how I arrived to be among her once again. She had a look of sheer gratitude upon the very sight of me, acting as if I had the only light within the darkness, hardly the reaction I was given before. "Arlo!" she then loudly shrieked upon her notice of him beside me, throwing off her warm gray-shrouded winter's cloak, dropping it upon the table as she bypassed me completely upon the horrid sight of her lifeless brother being held up by my condensed nightly shadow. The white hair I noticed in Anera's before in our first introduction in the darkness was suddenly blonde again like magic. "Put him down now!" she commanded towards my nightly shadow, distrusting his presence among the three of us, almost upset and casting blame upon him, the knee-jerk reaction of seeing a gruesome sight and wishing to kill the messenger for it. In her case, that shadow being the bearer of bad news, considering it held him while he remained as stiff as a corpse, with me absent of any word of explanation. The den we were in felt much like Melena's war room carriage, with a vibe quite similar to that stuffy cabin, only more dark and secretive, suited for all sorts of espionage and perversion. Another mysterious map room fit for obvious insurgency and revolution. Following Anera's instructions, regardless of the vibe, my knight had laid the prince onto the long empty table, striding past the small fleet of empty pushed-out chairs, moving it halfway down the table towards the fireplace despite the heat beginning to attack and deteriorate its skin, tearing away at its layers and demisting the bulk of its rock-solid arms and sides accordingly, the light of flame sapping its strength no different than fire would do to a thick block of ice if it were dropped into a hot stove at dinner time. "What happened to him? Kaya, is he going to be all right?" she asked me, trying to open his eyes only to look towards my own two shocked eyes as I tried to comprehend what was happening and whether I had just imagined the ghostly version of the woman who led me here. "No," I said, trying not to cry. "Our spiders bit him, Anera." "How did you find us?" spoke the other lady from beside the fireplace, cutting in only to keep her distance from me, her voice crackling and trembling, much like that of a person too sick or old to be of any serious threat to anyone. How wrong I was when I looked over towards the blackness to the warrior woman who came limping towards us. Melena's face uncloaked from the hood she had removed from her head, her walk slow as she was in crutches, a stiff hip, and one half of her right leg amputated and missing completely. All those features only becoming obvious when she left the darkness to come and inspect her lifeless son lying frozen stiff upon her ward table. "Bring him closer into the light," she insisted after coming around the table enough to quickly inspect him for the blue veiny bite mark branching out from his shoulder and 1 inch away from his heart, pushing over chairs as she limped up as close as she could get to him. "Melena?" I announced, puzzled, unsure of myself despite her presence beside us, her face old and withered, unlike the formidable mother I knew her to be. "How did you find us?" she asked again. "Are we in danger for being here?" she asked in deep concern. I looked at her, about to respond only to have the conversation halted with a harsh jolting sound of wings flapping and battering against the thick wooden roofline of branches above. "Explain everything later," someone said while tugging something forcefully down the ladder. Another Anera wrestling to control her own movement as she battled to hold a sharp-beaked predator swinging its sword-like nose, attempting to stab her with it. I gasped when I realized the newcomer had the white hair of the girl I'd seen before. Her voice and face was identical to the very girl standing beside Arlo. Some lost evil twin or shapeshifter who was so similar to Anera, I was rubbing my eyes in disbelief. "I could use some help, you know," she yelled, still tackling the crazily large gnat, which was as big as her. One of those needle-nosed bugs that had been swooping at her earlier. A nocturnal blood-sucking critter with 6 legs and 4 wings. snapping at all of us viciously as it attempted to flap free with the 2 remaining wings Anera couldn't grip as it attempted to escape from the hut she had dragged it down into. That pretend Anera had a ruthless ferocity about herself that was unbefitting of the princess I know. Wrathful and determined, despite the cuts and scratches she had already taken just to subdue it, she refused to let it go. Without the need to decree it, my man-sized shadow intervened to take control of it, pinning down the mindless winged predator against the table, each stab from the bug going straight through the shadow's torso as the shadow restrained it from all possible escape. "Don't hurt its beak. We need it," she ordered my shadow, speaking to it fully aware it was controlling itself free of any of my own suggestions. "What are you doing with that thing?" Melina asked frantically. "Why would you bring such a dangerous insect inside here?" "He's been bitten by a spider," that pale princess responded, removing all the layers of thick winter gear she had no need of inside the warmth of the hut. "We haven't had any anecdotes for years, but this creature sucks blood for food," she explained, trying to catch her breath due to the taxing effort it had taken just to bring it to us. "Maybe it can suck poison out before it spreads too far." Everyone looked to Anera, hoping she could confirm whether it was possible or not. "Prep the table," the real Anera ordered immediately in agreeance, checking over her brother. "Bring me every clean piece of cloth you have here," she stated. "What if we make it worse?" I asked. "What more harm can we do?" she replied bluntly, pulling off his medal and dropping it to the floor. Ripping off his wet mud-soaked shirt and using her hands to crystallize his skin, white flesh becoming clear like glass as all his organs became visible like they were underwater. The blood flow of his right arm and the pathway of venom towards his heart near complete. He's completely catatonic at this stage, but he has been bitten on the left side, so if we act quickly enough, we can remove the neurotoxin before it travels anywhere unrecoverable. "What do you need?" Melina asked as she joined Anera beside the table. Clearly no stranger to surgery, her hand grabbing and clamping over the beak of the giant gnat, locking its body under her arms, as if it were some artificial drilling machine Midas would have built, given the need. "Bring over as much cloth as you can spare," Anera said to her white-haired double, turning to her mother as she nodded her head to confirm the princess's orders. Cloth being as valuable as gold in winter climates. At least that's how I remembered it. "Start at the wound and move inwards, slowly," Anera rambled to her mother who held the bug, mapping out Arlo's body as if it were a battle map on their war table. Mother and daughter working with perfect synergy, a sight our own world hadn't seen in half a decade. "Hold its beak firm. Control the flow rate that way," she continued to advise her mother. "Just don't let that creature escape, okay?" she announced, immune to the grotesque incision site and blood splatter from the surgery commencing. I sat down, trying not to be sick, my shadow disappearing to the light as I sat down at the furthest end of the table, as closest to the warmth as I could, unable to look at the graphic nature of the surgery without feeling ill. The idea of that needle-nosed gnat about to be stabbed into Arlo's body to feed on the bad blood was making me want to vomit. "What you're doing is fine, for the bulk of it, but we've got to be exactly precise when we start moving upwards," Anera instructed her mother, the princess pulling out a pin that she must have kept in the back of her dress, bending it like a needle and threading apart some of her dress as she ripped out spare lining. "Is that silk or linen?" Melina asked, watching her as she multitasked, ready to stitch up the wound afterwards. "It's cotton thread. Don't worry, it doesn't inflame the wound. I use it for this very reason," Anera responded, the two of them colluding in pure concentration as the rogue pale princess and I were to take 2 separate seats, only to observe and wait for instruction among the tail end of the long table. I felt hot, dry and flustered despite seeming all of the opposite. I was 1 step shy of a panic attack but had to simply breathe and recompose, all while the pale snow-white beauty on the other side of the table leaned back casually, almost bored and disinterested, fiddling with a smooth and shiny bronze ring that sat on her finger as she continued to twist it on and off, completely absolved from the situation. "Thank you," I said to her. "You didn't have to thank me. He does," she stated, staring towards Arlo with the very same look of unbridled resentment she had when she first laid eyes upon him back in the forest. "He's very lucky you were there," I added, complimenting her as a way to break the ice and perhaps change the negative perspective she clearly had about him and me. Luck had nothing to do with it, she snarled back, unwilling to accept any praise about the subject. So what is that bug? I asked her, looking over to the creature, never having seen anything like it before. We don't have a name for them, she informed me. Ordinarily, they keep to themselves in the higher trees, drinking sap. They're generally peaceful, but you've got to be careful of the pregnant ones. They're the ones that seek blood over nectar, she explained to me. So how did you know that one was pregnant? I asked curiously. Because it was the only one attacking me, she replied, revealing the smallest smile of a joke before turning her face bitter and impassive again, trying to keep herself detached from us and the whole situation we'd brought to her house. Are you ever going to tell me who are you and where exactly we are? I asked, still desperate for some actual answers to all my many theories. What is this place? And what happened to your mother's leg? I added quite rashly and impolitely, looking into her eyes as she sat there on the other side, hearing me but choosing simply not to respond. Why don't you just relax? She said to me dismissively, trying to silence me from asking questions, as if I was the one pretending to be something I'm not or acting ignorantly to some kind of well-devised con. It'll all be explained in time, she assured me, leaning back in the chair and closing her eyes. Why can't you just tell me now? I don't know how much time we have to spare, I then pleaded to her, although only despising her further as she chose to stand up and walk away from me instead, moving to sit on the smaller side table and chair beside the warming mantel of the fireplace. With no choice but to work it out on my own, I began observing all the other things I could see while centered in the dark, muggy hut, shocked to discover another body I had completely missed upon my entrance. It was the resting figure of a wounded soldier about Arlo's height and size. Lying on the darker end of the smaller side table, the pale princess sat beside. Her table was covered in blankets and pillows for the young man to rest upon, his hair appearing as white as Melena's and her daughter's. Only his hair was short and wavy with messed up spikes. Pilly, dear, we need that adrenaline sac beside you and Levi. This man's going to need the rest of it if he is to pull through this, Melena said towards her daughter over in the corner. Whoa, no. Wait a second. The pale princess erupted, jumping up out of her chair abruptly, prepared to block anyone who dared to retrieve the adrenaline sac on the table beside Levi. You can't give him any of it. I doubt there's any more left in this world, she blurted out. Her mother held her arm steady, locking the creature still as they remained in mid-operation, staring back at her, concerned. The blood-hungry bug seeming to stare over at her along with the others, upset over being held just outside its reach of Arlo's body mid-feet. Don't dispute this, Melena replied. He's going to die without it, Pilly, she sternly added. Then let him die. I don't care about them, she yelled. Levi will die if you take the adrenaline away from him. What if he still needs more? She added in concern, looking back to the other injured man across the table, a body greatly resembling the figure of her own white-haired brother. Pilly, her mother softly and compassionately tried to reason. The adrenaline can't save Levi. It will only prolong the inevitable, she stated sadly. So then give him another day, Pilly argued, tears building in her eyes as she stood her ground. He deserves it more. Anera and me both looked to each other, wishing to speak, but smart enough to know our silence was best for the situation. The two of us choosing to keep quiet as we waited anxiously for Melena's verdict. Pilly, I know how much you love your brother, but we have a real chance to save this man's life right now, she argued. I was already suspicious of who he was, but nevertheless, her response shocked me all the same. His shape and muscle tone was identical to Arlo's, and although at first his image was quite hard to distinguish from stray corner objects, upon hearing her words, the realization that it was him was suddenly as clear as day. Levi was Arlo's double, just as Pilly was Anera's. Some parts of their parallel world were starting to make sense. Their hair was albino white, and their skin a smooth, shiny pale due to the lack of sun and the nutrients sunlight gave to the skin. Arlo had lost his crystal sword in the wall of our castle's southern spire, but there, by that smaller table, was another replica of it. Resting upright beside the other man, balancing on the corner, a perfect duplicate of Arlo's crystal sword. It also dawned on me that Levi had the wrapping of a battle wound on the low left side of his chest, the same spot Arlo had stabbed the elite swordsman he had beaten in the Ambervale village assault, which explained exactly why Pilly held so much resentment towards us. The war between us and the gnolls had been so evenly balanced because the same people were fighting it on both sides. The significance of that epiphany seemed to have been long discovered by Anera already. But for me it was scary. Scary because it meant we were side by side with our one true enemy. The dark mystery concerning all things unexplained had become so obvious it was near humorous in irony. I mean, after all, Anera was the queen of escape, so who else could have successfully captured other than another version of herself? Who else could rival Arlo in a sword fight other than himself? As lastly, what other couple would be capable of building a transdimensional portal, had the invention of the Sunspire never separated the man who could build the conduit gateway stones from the woman who could control and power them? The troubled young girl hadn't taken the princess for ransom at all. She'd taken her because she needed a nurse for her dying brother, a brother who was dying from a sword wound my prince had given him. Events that once seemed random and irrelevant were flashing before my eyes with an amazing sense of sequence and pattern. "I don't care," Pilly stubbornly retorted. "He deserves to die," she stated ruthlessly, looking at him with disgust and gripping her bow, as if deciding whether or not to aim it at him. "Then why did you bring him here?" Melina shouted back at her daughter in heated frustration. Her harsh words more a tearful cry than they were of her hazardous and typical harpy screeches. Lost of all response, Pilly dropped back to her seat in a stumped pouty defeat, throwing the fleshy green organ sack across the room over onto the table beside Arlo. Her careless actions near squashing it as Anera was quick and careful to catch it. Filled with so much repressed anger and disdain, Anera's attitude towards living was nothing like that of her Tempest double. Even in the worst situations, Anera was able to feign a brave face. But that pretty pale princess was barely keeping herself together. She was a storm of emotion, somebody who was without innocence and had to grow up much faster than age was meant to permit. While conversely, her mother was but a ghost of her older self, someone so faint and vulnerable. It was just as strange to see her being the new embodiment of fondness and compassion towards helping others, even if the person she helped just happened to look incidentally like her own critically injured son. Pilly sat stewing in silence for a great amount of time after her short outburst. Of course, there were many things I still wanted to ask her, but I was a guest and knew it wasn't the right time for me to start asking questions. And so, waiting patiently in the gentle warmth and glimmered darkness while staring at my necklace to a final wipe of sweat and blood around Arlo's feverish body, the surgery was done. Anera brought over a bowl of water as directed and started washing the table clean around him. Melina carried the full-bellied bug towards the ladder entry point and allowed it to fly out of the ascending chute, its ability to fly greatly stifled by its fat, expanded belly as it happily buzzed out towards the unseen forest skies. Anera walked up to me after washing up, sitting beside me as I sat silently and patiently, waiting for her to speak. "I don't know how long it will take for him to recover, but he will recover," she said, smiling, before looking over to her duplicate who still sat in the darkness away from everyone. "We all owe you, Pilly," she stated. "Okay, cool. Thanks for that," she sarcastically bit back. "Now, what about my brother? Have you even looked at him yet?" she asked, unable to look away from his motionless body. "Well, your mother did a good job of stitching him up, and the wound itself is only minor, but the infection and fever the wound caused is very serious, and I can't treat them without specific medicine," she sadly and shamefully then admitted. "I'm sorry, but only our doctor can save him." "So after all this, there's nothing you can do for him?" she vented in angst. "If I can bring our doctor back here, I can save your brother," Anera contested. "Pilly, I know you don't believe us, but we didn't know about any of this. There can be a truce between both of our worlds," she stated optimistically. "Please don't lose hope for him now. There is still time," Anera said, moving over towards her, placing a hand on her shoulder, only to have it shrugged away defensively. "There is no hope for him then, because there can be no truce," Pilly stated pessimistically. "You've taken too much for us to ever accept amends," she stipulated. "But can your world even survive if you don't receive our help?" I asked, joining their conversation from the distance. making assumptions of their inevitable doom based on what I had seen and assumed to be true. Her silence said more than any real words ever could, as with it came the thoughts about what we needed most, some well-devised plan, anything that could, at the bare minimum, uplift us all from the gloom we were stuck under. In order to lead that movement, however, I needed to know exactly what was happening. "So, are you two like twins or something?" I joked coyly, playing dumb while trying to showcase my clear desire for an explanation about everything. Anera and Pilly shared a small smile as they looked at each other and rolled their eyes, making the same silly face simultaneously, as they too questioned the very absurdity of everything occurring around us. "When he wakes up, he'll want some food and drinkable water," Melina interrupted. "Pilly, perhaps you can take Kaya with you to get some," she authorized. "As far as explanations go, sometimes a picture can paint 1,000 words," she then stated, turning to me. I wasn't sure if it was wise for me to leave Arlo behind while he was still unconscious. My own lingering weight as I looked over towards him bringing clear testament to that. "It's all right, Kaya. I'll stay with him. He's going to be safe here," Anera reassured me. I took a second to think about it, but having been left out in the darkness for so long, I was more than thrilled to be finally getting some honest answers. "All right then. Come on, princess," I said to Pilly as I walked over to the stairs and wait, feeling rejuvenated from the whole terrifying ordeal. Catching the winter's cloak Anera threw at me as I began putting it on, leaving one hand out towards Pilly in friendship and inviting her to follow me as I took the first step up onto the stairs. It was obvious by her weight that she didn't feel too kindly about being alone with me again, possibly related to something the other version of me must have done to her in the past. "I'm not a princess," Pilly said, refusing my hand, which remained suspended in the air beside her as she walked up the plank ladder first. "Come on then, we're waiting on you now," she announced, leaving me to chase her up the branchy steps in swift pursuit.